Everyone, coming to you again with another underrated film, and today I wanted to briefly discuss Letters from Iwo Jima. Yes, Letters from Iwo Jima. I think this film in particular is more underrated in the sense because of the fact that it does have a lot of actors that I think Americans wouldn't be familiar with, because all the actors within this film are Japanese, as well as and there's also another important thing to note, which is that this film, for the most part, they are speaking Japanese. Rarely is there English spoken. So if you have issues with like subtitles, I'm sure that you could maybe find one where they just speak in English and they dub it in English. But for the most part, this film is geared towards Japanese, or geared towards the Japanese perspective of World War II. In particular, the battle that took place on Iwo Jima, which is an island, and in like the Pacific, and basically it's told through the Japanese perspective, like I said. And what I really think is a very good thing that this film does is that it tries to paint us this picture of that war isn't so black and white, like good guy, bad guy type thing. This film tries to sort of interwove these two sides, the American side and the Japanese side, and show you that not everything was so like in a sense of having these two sides be identified as a good or a bad side. It tries to show you how the Japanese themselves had difficulties in dealing with this war and dealing with certain things that were pressed upon them during the war. And you'll kind of see how this sort of unfolds. And a lot of the scenes, I think, really do highlight that both sides, both American and Japanese, were capable of, in these very difficult and painful times, were capable of doing good as also doing things that could be equally horrible. And I think this film really does try to paint that for you. And you do end up sympathizing with the main characters. You do kind of get a sense of what their background was, because they try to go back before the characters ended up on Iwo Jima a bit. And basically the two characters that I think are worth noting and are the most significant in the film is General Tadamichi Kobayashi, who is played by Ken Watanabe, which is a famous Japanese actor that we've seen in some other films as well that I've previously done, like Memoirs of a Geisha, and I believe he was also in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So very, very famous Japanese actor, and a really cool one at that. I really like this guy. He sounds so awesome. And then we have Private First Class Saigo, who's played by Kazurari Ninomiya. And basically, the film tries to focus more onto those two and sort of their kind of background. We see how Ken Watanabe's character, who is a general of this sort of mission on Iwo Jima to sort of protect the island, because again, the Americans are invading Iwo Jima, and you kind of see how he had relationships with Americans, and he's been to America before and has had experiences there. And you kind of see those experiences and how I think it really gives a sense of how the Japanese, even though we ended up in war with them, we still happened to develop these kinds of bonds with them. In particular, since Ken Watanabe's character is a general, it kind of shows how these kinds of relationships between America and Japan sort of just changed over time. But it seems like that the film tries to paint this idea that that the Japanese were fairly open to understanding American culture, and a lot of Japanese actually lived in America. As you'll probably hear, there were camps that the Japanese were taken to that were American citizens but taken into camps because Americans were afraid for some reason that there were spies, and so they decided to put them all in camps. Even though this is not discussed or mentioned in this film, it does bring up a good point that there is this kind of intercultural mixing. It's not like the Japanese were completely unaware of our culture. And you'll see how Ken Watanabe's character is like driving down the road in an American car, and he talks about like his experiences and how he kind of sees things that are in America and how they're maybe different than how they are in maybe something like Japan. But you do get a sense also of his pride for his country, and that he would defend his country if it were to come to that. And this is where we kind of get this understanding of how, again, this film doesn't paint this black and white picture. It tries to intermix things and tell you that it's not as simple as people maybe make them out to be. So there's that. And then there's also Private First Class Saigo, who is technically the main character of this film, actually. Even though Ken Watanabe's character does play a pivotal role, it seems like Saigo is the one that's really, for the most part, focused on. And the reason being is because, again, Japanese people, soldiers, men, were drafted. They basically there's a scene where Saigo is like with his wife, and his wife's pregnant, and they basically come into his house, and they're like, you know, aren't you so happy? You know, you get to go off and fight. Like, you know, you get to fight for us. And Saigo completely does not want to do this. I mean, he doesn't want to leave his wife behind who's pregnant, and he doesn't want to, like, you know, risk, you know, not being able to see his child born. And, you know, so obviously he's not in a state of like, yeah, I want to go out and fight at all. And you'll see this clearly in the beginning when he is like digging, and they're supposed to be, I think, like digging sort of these trenches, and basically he starts complaining, and he says at one point, like, the Americans, they can have this island, like, you know, because I mean, he just does not want to be there. And he doesn't seem to have that sort of same mentality that a lot of the other Japanese soldiers that are surrounded by him have. Their mentality is more that you should defend your country and do whatever it takes, and if you can't win, then the honorable thing to do is to sort of like die with honor. If you've read up on World War II history, you would kind of know this, that there was a lot of suicides that were done for the Japanese side, because they sort of had this mentality that you should either win, or you should just die with honor. It's that kind of perspective, and you'll kind of see how Saigo doesn't seem to really fit that mold, because he doesn't want to die, and he doesn't want to like leave his wife behind and his kid behind. You know, it's that kind of mentality that he has that's so different from a lot of the other sort of side characters who feel like that they need to fight to the bitter end. They should not surrender. That's really a big point in Japan, is that surrender was not a concept. It wasn't like in Germany, where the Germans could surrender if things were pretty much hopeless. The Japanese way was you don't surrender, you don't give up, and if you die in that process, then you die, because that's the honorable thing to do, which is fairly a fairly interesting concept, but also a very a very difficult concept maybe for some to kind of understand. Even for me, it's kind of hard to understand like that kind of mentality, but you'll sort of see how suicide does play a pivotal role once the Japanese start losing Iwo Jima, and how some of them even Saigo is like in a room with all of these other Japanese soldiers, and they're pretty much losing at this point, and some of them just decide that they're just going to end their lives, and they like take these grenades and they like hold them up to like their chest, and then once the grenade explodes, they're gone. And you'll kind of see how this is fairly affected on Saigo. And you'll kind of see too how Saigo's feelings towards the Americans are fairly mixed, because we do get this one scene where there is this American who's injured, but he's taken in by Japanese, and the Japanese start asking him like questions. I think I'm not sure if they know that he's pretty much a goner at this point, because the injury is just so impacting. But basically, one of the side characters basically tries to figure out, like, he kind of asks like, where are you from, and you know, what do you do, and it's fairly interesting to see that, and then you kind of realize that there's really nothing different about these two sides, really. And I think Clint Eastwood, who did direct and he co-produced also this film, he really did try to emphasize, I think, this point. I think Clint Eastwood was really trying to hammer this down, like, not everything is like a big, you know, big good versus evil type thing. It's not like that. This war is not like that. that's really what Clint Eastwood, I think, tried to picture. And I've seen an interview with him, and he pretty much sums it up in the same way that I'm summing it up to you, where there are these moments where they can find some connection, the Japanese and the Americans. But at times there's also points where the Americans do things that are fairly regrettable in that sense. At one point, one of the side characters wants to surrender, and he basically, I think he comes out with like a sort of a flag, or he just comes up with his hands up and he basically surrenders. And I believe it was 2. I don't know if it's sometimes it's hard for me to tell if it's Saigo or not, but there's also another character that also, I think, tries to surrender. I think it might be Saigo. But basically they come out and the Americans are like, okay, we'll take you captive. And then some of the Americans decide, okay, we're gonna go somewhere else now. You two, they tell, I think it's like 2 Americans, like, you guard them. Make sure, like, that they don't escape or they don't do something. And basically, what happens in that scene is the Americans, I think, sort of get tired of watching them, and they decide, like, why don't we just be rid of them? And basically they kill, I know that they kill one. Again, I don't know if I don't know if, I'm trying to remember if Saigo escaped or not, or if there were 2 that were killed, but somebody is killed. At least one Japanese soldier is killed, who is pretty much defenseless. And Clint Eastwood does try to show this, because he is, like, holding up his hands like, I don't have anything, I'm, like, not gonna harm you. But the Americans, they kill him. And then at one point you'll see how Saigo's character in particular admires, or Saigo the character really admires the general played by Ken Watanabe. And when something happens to Ken Watanabe, it really does affect him towards the end. And you'll kind of see how his feelings towards the Americans are more with anger and with hurt and with pain, because of these various experiences that he's had. And I think it's fairly telling. I think it really does change your viewpoint about the Japanese side during World War II. I think this film really does try to hammer this down, and I think it does it in a fairly effective way, by showing the good on both sides and also the bad on both sides. And I think that's fairly telling in a war film. If a war film can do that, I think it makes it more impacting and more effective at trying to reach the audience and trying to make the audience understand, like, these different ways of how human beings interact with one another, even though they're from different parts of the world. And it's kind of funny. There's also a scene where Ken Watanabe is at a dinner with all these different Americans, and basically he's getting some kind of award, and it seems like that for some reason the Americans before the war seemed to have, like, this I guess close companionship with the Japanese, even though that drastically ended when Pearl Harbor came. But it was funny because one of the wives at the dinner of an American, she asked, like, who would win if the Japanese went against the Americans? And Ken Watanabe's character basically says, you know, if it were to come to that, I would defend my country. And I think it's kind of funny how in the film they try to make it sort of like jokingly, like it's a joke, and you know, like, yeah, that's never gonna happen, but then it ends up happening, and it's sort of interesting in that respect as to that it happens, and how people maybe joke about things, but never really realize the sort of impact that these things could have, even though they may seem impossible during the time. So it's again trying to, I think, hammer down this point of there are these two sides, but they're still the same in their own respects, and they're also different in their own respects. And I think that's fairly important to get across in a war film. And I think very interesting and fairly eye-opening, I think, for the most part. But as far as giving anything else plot-wise away, I don't really want to, because I would really encourage people to watch this film. And even, I believe Clint Eastwood at one point said it was actually difficult because a lot of the Japanese characters or Japanese actors couldn't speak English, and so you kind of had sometimes this communication barrier. But it seemed like that there was a lot of effort put into it, and it seemed like that Iwo Jima actually got a little bit more box office money, even though it wasn't really exploited again into the US as much until later on, because it was released in Japan first, and then after some time went by, it finally got to the United States, and then it finally got dispersed a bit more. But it seems like this one seems to have a little bit more stance than the Flags of Our Fathers film. That's supposed to be sort of a counter film where it talks about the American side. But it seems like nobody really, but despite that, it seems like nobody really talks about this film in particular. They kind of leave this film out when it comes to war films. And I personally like this take. I think this take is very interesting, and it would be really nice to see more films like this, where they do kind of show a different side, and they try to not sugarcoat anything, and they try to make something fairly raw and very resignative onto both cultures, and in doing so create a perspective to show that we really aren't all that different. It's just we have these different ideas, and sometimes these different ideas end up causing a lot of problems. And what's important is that we try to realize that no matter what place we are in war, there's always these good and bad aspects onto every single side of an argument. And I think that's really what this film is trying to say to you and trying to show to you. But as far as everything else goes, I think the characters are well done for the most part. Again, I don't know if this is available in English. I'm pretty sure you could find an English dubbing of it. But I think it is eye-opening, I think, for people, and that's why I think more people should watch it. And I think there should be more films like this where there's different perspectives and different angles that we can look from. And I think it can teach us a lot. And I think it's eye-opening in that sense. And Clint Eastwood directed it. I mean, Clint Eastwood's awesome. So why not watch a film directed by Clint Eastwood? And yeah, I think that's really, though, all I can say about it. I think it's a good take on the Japanese struggle within the Second World War. And I think it's underrated because, again, we don't get a lot of Hollywood type actors, and we didn't really actually see this film when it actually came out. And it seems like that rarely these films really, even though they do, I think, get recognized by like the Academy and such, they don't seem to be fairly, people don't seem to really look at them so much. And I think it's important that people do, and I think it can offer a lot of, it can open a lot of doors. But I think that's really all I can say about it. Any questions, comments, concerns? More than happy to answer them, and until next time.